series called Remember, and how God uses covenants and symbols so that we remember that God is a promise keeper and that God follows through with the things that He's doing. So the story of Noah in Genesis 6, it is. Well, here's the thing. So nearly every civilization that's ever existed has their own flood myth. Okay, and so I used to argue. I've said this before, but I used to argue with atheists online. That used to just be what I did for fun. And so when I was like a teenager, and so one of the things they'd always say, well, there's these other people have flood myths, and so the Bible's just copying off. I was like, well, first of all, if everyone has a flood myth, what likely happened? A flood? Yeah, right. So it's likely that a flood happened. But so when I say myth, though, I don't mean not true. Okay, so myth, sometimes we use the word myth probably incorrectly most of the time, where it's like, oh, that's a myth, like it's something that we toss aside as if it's like not true or irrelevant or not useful, right? But a myth it's a form of language that represents some field of human experience, right? And so I say it this way. I think it was something like some things are true and then some things are more than true. It's something like that. And so, but the thing is, so you can take this story of Noah, you can take it literally, right? Or you can take it figuratively as a story that's trying to express something to us. But either way, we extrapolate out the same thing. Okay, so I want to give permission to both people, because I sometimes like, well, did it really happen? And all these things, I permission, whichever one happened, we still know, we can still pull out the same things that we need to. And so, but when you take some of these stories only literally, you do miss some of the kind of existential depth that these stories have, because these stories are so old, and there's so much packed into them, okay? So, in Genesis chapter 6, verse 11, let's pick up there, all right? It says, "Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence." So at least a lot has changed since then, right? And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, "I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now I'm going to destroy them along with the earth." Anyone remember when Hurricane Katrina hit? Was it like 2005, something around there? I was a youth pastor in Ravenna, Ohio, and we were able to take a trip down to New Orleans right after it hit. I mean, to the point they're still working through the rubble. Like when we were down there, we went down there to help kind of rebuild houses and some of those things. I got a nickname Sledge when we were there, and so I was breaking something up, and I had a sledgehammer, and I was going at it, you know what I mean? I don't even remember what I was trying to break up, but when I went back with it, the sledgehammer flew out of my hands, and this lady's house, she had stacked all the windows that survived, and the sledgehammer went through all of them, right? And so I was sledged the rest of the event. But the reason I bring that up is like, so when we went to see the levee, like where the levee broke, right? Because it wasn't necessarily the storm, right? But it was the breaking of the levee that caused a lot of the damage. And we went there, and you could see where it broke, because it was a very poor kind of trailer park area, and there was just slabs of concrete. That was all it was left. The water had rushed so hard that it pushed all these trailers back like 5 or 6 blocks, like not city blocks, but roads in the trailer park, right? And so you just had these slabs sitting there, and it was like the Dutch also live under sea level, right? And so when they built their levees or their dikes, their engineers said that they were built to withstand the worst storm in over 1,000 years. Like that's how they go, okay, if we have what's the worst storm in 1,000 years, we got to build it to make sure it can withstand that type of destruction. Well, the Army Corps of Engineers said that the New Orleans dikes or levees were built for the worst storm in 100 years, okay? Which technically, that means every 100 years you're likely to have some kind of catastrophe there. But also, because of corruption, they stopped taking care of them also, right? And so when you start to think of floods and destruction, because what a lot of people would say, well, why did you let this happen? And, well, is it God's fault or is it sin, right? If sin is not doing what we're called to do, missing the mark, right? And so these levees and then destruction comes out of sin. And so I think part of the story of Noah is that when you let racism, classism, theft, cover-up, sin, when is prevalent and unrelenting, you can expect a flood. You should expect a flood when sin is running rampant. And so Romans 6:23, right? For the wages of sin is death. And so this doesn't just mean like eternally, right? The sins of that city cost people their lives, right? And so when sin runs rampant, expect things to go poorly. Can I have my water, babe? I should just bring it up with me every time instead of asking you halfway through this, but thank you. All right, so back to our text. Verse 14. It says, make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. And this is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Its width, 50 cubits, and its height, 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above, and put the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. Now, side note here is we're flood myths, as far as flood myths go, the ark, the Bible's ark, is probably the only one that would actually function. All right? So I think, is it Gilgamesh? Not Gilgamesh, that's not right. Yeah, it is Gilgamesh. Epic of Gilgamesh. It was like a cube in that. It was like, and cubes don't float very well. So that wouldn't really work. Some were like rafts. Some of these civilizations, it was just a raft that you survived on. One was a hollowed out, I think one of them was a hollowed out tree trunk. That they survived the flood in a hollowed out tree trunk. So these are the other myths, right? And so the ark seems to be the only one that I saw that would actually function for a long time on water. But what does it mean to build yourself an ark? Right? And so this is what I mean kind of when I talk about missing kind of the existential depth of some of these stories, because if it's just a story about a guy surviving a flood, then you just kind of move on from it. But is there something for us? Like, how do I build my ark? I got divorced when my kids were pretty young. I think like 3 and 5, something like that. I was still pastoring, and their mom became agnostic, and so that's kind of life changing for me, right? Because I went from having my kids and my family raised in church, around church people all the time, and then all of a sudden you have your kids half of your life, or half of their life. And so one of the things that I did is this was at the time when the new atheism, I don't know if you were tracking, with some new atheism kind of picked up in the early like 10s to 2015, somewhere around there. And so one of the things that I knew that I had to do is I wanted to make sure that, because I knew my kids were going to have questions, like, and they have questions that I never asked until I was in college. All right, like, so they're asking questions, and I'm like, I gotta know. I want to know the answers, and so I spent 3 years probably just studying Christian apologetics, and apologetics, it doesn't mean apology, right? It's from apologia, which is to make an argument for it. Peter uses it in 1 Peter 3:15. It says, "Always be prepared to give an answer." That's apologia. Right, to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect, right? And so I wanted to make sure, and every book I could find that would answer questions that atheists would have, or all these different things, I was just soaking it all up. So if you fast forward a few years later, I found myself in a storm. I had allowed sin to run rampant in my life. And And at first it was small. It was small sin. And it didn't bother anybody, and it didn't bother me, and it was fine. But what sin does is it grows. Sin always grows. And it grew to the point where it likely wanted to destroy everything that I've ever done, to destroy me, destroy my family and my friends. And I was so angry at God, so mad. It's like, none of this is true. None of this is real. This was all a waste of my time. This was a waste of an education. This was a waste of my 20s, right? This was all of it stupid. And if God exists, he doesn't care. But every time I tried to walk away, I had already built this ark that God had placed me in, right? It's like every argument I tried to make to get myself out of it, I knew didn't work. Right? I knew I was just kidding myself because I had built this ark in my life prior to the storm. And so in the Lenten season, this is one of the questions we have to ask ourselves. How is your ark? Because it doesn't have to be apologetics, right? It doesn't have to be what my ark was made out of. But how's your ark? How's your faith? Paul says to the Philippians in chapter 2, he says, therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, right? You want your faith to be strong. You have to work it out. It's just not something you get and put it away and hopefully it works out for you later. It's something that's constantly being worked out in our lives. And so when we talk about giving things up for Lent, right, that's kind of what we do in Lent. We like to give things up. I wonder if it should be our time. Can we give up some of our time to God? Are we spending that time working on our faith, reading our Bibles, right? Serving other people. Let's give up some of our time. Maybe time to pray, time to read, time to serve. Vert, let's go back to the text. For my part, I'm going to bring a flood of waters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die, but I will establish my covenant with you. So there's two basic types of covenants in the Bible. There's conditional and unconditional covenants. Okay, so like a conditional covenant. So like marriage would be an unconditional covenant, right? Like it's not like I wouldn't go, Ashley, I vow to love you the rest of my life as long as, right? You can't throw the as long as. It doesn't work. Like the conditional marriage is, no, I am here. Like I'm putting my vows here, and I say I do, right? And it's like, this is just who I am. Now, obviously, those things don't always work out as planned, but the concept is one of unconditional covenant. And so when you look at conditional covenants, there's a lot of if-then statements. You know, like if-then, like, and so it's like, if you do this, then I will do this. So it's more contractual, like those types of covenants. But those are your two covenants, and we'll get back. That'll matter later. But those are your two different covenants. So it says, now look at the 7:17. For 40 days the flood kept coming on the earth. And as the waters increased, they lifted the ark high above the earth. And so if you're kind of wondering, what does this all have to do with Lent? We're getting there. Lent, we generally connect with Jesus in the wilderness, right? After Jesus is baptized, before he starts his earthly ministry, he goes into the wilderness where he's tempted for 40 days, right? And so that's where our 40 days comes from. But 40 in the Bible is a number that's always connected to testing and trial and preparation, right? And so for Jesus in the wilderness was a time of temptation and trial and preparation for his ministry. And so when we're aligning ourselves with Jesus during this Lenten season, it's like, so what is God preparing me for? I'm preparing. What we're also doing, we're preparing for Easter. Right? We're getting ready for a celebration. Like the reason the church is here is for Easter. And so this is the season where we do something to prepare our lives. Are we living in such a way that we should expect a flood, or are we living in such a way that we are bringing glory and honor to Jesus for what he did on the cross for us? Right? That's when we examine our lives. Am I living in a way that's going to produce a flood? It's a time of examination and cleansing. Genesis 8:15. Then God said to Noah, "Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase in number on it." And so Noah came out, together with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives, all the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground and all the birds. Everything that moves on the land came out of the ark, one kind after another. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. How'd you like to be the bird that made it all the way through the flood, and then you're just sacrificed the first day? That's tough. There's a couple things inside of here, though, right? There's a couple things in this, and I think one of the things is that, the story's about Noah, but his whole family comes out of the ark. It's like, so what does that mean? It means something like, when you choose to live rightly, you have the ability to save your family. You can be the place where generational sin either starts or stops. I've not been the perfect example to my children, but I was a way better dad than my dad. I was a way better husband than my dad was, right? And so I can decide if I want things that have been generational curses. I get to decide if I want those things to continue. Now, my kids can decide if they want to pick up curses, and get rid of new ones later, but I had to get rid of some of mine. And so when we live rightly, when we make the right sacrifices, when we're seeking first the kingdom of God that we've been talking about, like, we can affect our families. And I think that's something that we miss with the Noah story. The whole family is saved because of Noah, in the way Noah lived his life. But what did Noah do at the end? Right, he made this sacrifice, right? Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. He worshiped, right? He worshiped, and so that's Easter, right? It's like it's death to life. It's resurrection. It's like we were dead. Everything's dead. We should have been dead, but we're alive, right? So there's this worship that happens. Like, God, thank you for saving us. And it's like we worship because he saves us. And so, like, I worship here because he saved me. And I don't just mean like save me eternally. Like, I get to go to heaven, but he also saved me from being an abusive husband that my dad was. Right? He saved me from being a father who's never around like my dad was. He saved me. And I know that person's in me. I know that person exists, right? And so I worship, and I'm grateful, and I'm just so thankful when we sing these words and we sing these songs that God did not leave me where I was. And it's like, so it's an echo, right? It's like Psalm 40. It says, I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in him. See, we worship because we're not stuck in the mud anymore. We worship because God lifted us up and put us on a firm foundation. And so we're almost done. Genesis 9:16. We've covered 3 chapters today. That's way more than we normally cover in this service. I'm just... Verse 16. Wherever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth. So God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on earth. And so this is a covenant, unconditional covenant that God makes. He doesn't ask us to say, I do's at the end. He just says, this is what I'm doing. I'm establishing this covenant. But every covenant has a sign that reminds us that God is a promise keeper. Our marriages have rings. The church has communion, Lord's Supper, right? We have everywhere Christians have been going for thousands of years, there's crosses. We put crosses up everywhere as a symbol of what Jesus did. The ichthys, right, the Jesus fish, that was a symbol for Christians to secretly tell other people that they were Christians, right, so they wouldn't get crucified. And right, so we have all of these symbols, but the one that I wanted to look at today is I want to do something we haven't done in Impact yet. It's one of the first things I experienced when I came to the Methodist Church, and I'd never heard of it, and I was like, I love this. I love this concept of remembering our baptism, and I've brought it up a few times, but I was like, I text Pastor Rob and I said, I want to do this tomorrow because I was reading. I want to read what Peter says in 1 Peter 3. It really connects here. Verse 20 says, to those who were disobedient long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. In it, only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water. And this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also. Not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a clear conscience toward God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at God's right hand with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him.